I stole from my family. I lied to my family. I was stealing my grandmother's prescription medications, and I know I'm a good person at this point in my life. I know I have a big heart. You know, I would look my mom and dad in the eyes and wonder, like, why can't I connect to what y'all are going through? You know, why can't I feel it? And having like some level of awareness, you know, about that. And man, not even being able to tap into it. Like, all my mind was fixated on is I can't feel these feelings.
Right.
I have to go and use.
Substance use disorder touches all our lives, and often we feel hopeless or frustrated in our pursuit to understand how and why it happens.
Welcome to APC Recovery Cafe, where we discuss the topics and trends around substance use, provide education and resources, offer recovery support, and also discuss prevention tactics, all through the stories of the people who have been there.
We invite you to grab your favorite coffee or tea and join us for a variety of guests that will bring understanding, information, connection, and hope.
Together, we can break the stigma and pave a brighter future for each other.
Hey folks, welcome back into this episode of APC Recovery Cafe. My name is Art Wimberly. I'm a person grateful to be in long-term recovery, and I'm a volunteer at the Addiction Prevention Coalition. And this morning we have the Executive Director of APC, Carrie Wimberly, in studio. Carrie, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. It's only been, 30 minutes since we last saw each other? Yeah.
Beautiful weather outside.
Yeah. So tell us, who do we have as our guest this morning?
Yeah, super excited. We have Jared Murray with us today. Jared is a friend, a partner with APC, a great provider of resource information. I call on him often. He works at Momentum Recovery. He's a person in long-term recovery, so we'll get to hear a little bit about his journey. And I just learned today, a real estate agent. Wow. So how long has that been going on?
That's been going on for just a couple years.
Wow.
You know, I don't advertise it too much, you know, but the recovery work and the treatment work is definitely my main squeeze, you know.
Yeah,
and that's what I'm passionate about and what I really love. Yeah. Got my real estate license because my wife and I still have some student loan debt we need to pay
There
off.
you go.
And so, you know, when you work in the treatment space, you don't exactly get all the funding you can to pay off student loans.
Yes.
So I had to get my
Well,
little side gig to help out with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We're excited about the conversation. Jared joined our family support group not long ago and shared his story there. It was very impactful. People are still talking about it and asking for your number, and so we appreciate that. I know you're busy and you do a lot, so doing those things after hours is a commitment, so we appreciate that. But we'll start by talking about your beverage of choice. That's how we always like to introduce the conversation. So sparkling water was yours, and it's interesting because I don't know that we've had a duplicate yet.
We haven't.
Which is crazy, as many as we have done.
This is the first sparkling water.
This is the first sparkling water. Yes.
A podcast with people in recovery, and this is your first sparkling water.
Yes, I mean, but so you don't have a relationship with coffee.
I don't have a relationship with coffie. I did
amazing.
used to have a relationship with uppers and stimulants a long time ago, but today coffee's not one that I choose. You know,
Good for you.
It gets me a little bit too sped up. You know.
So you're pretty hyped up when you wake up. So
I'm already hyped up enough. I don't need any more coffee.
You're good to go.
That's right. That's right.
So, I mean, you just drink water in the morning?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big runner. You know, my wife and I are huge into running, and so drink a lot of sports drink, Gatorade in the morning after a run. I run most mornings.
Okay.
But I do love me some Perrier, some sparkling water. You go to any sort of recovery event these days, you know, like in our industry, you go to conferences or events, and there's just tons of Perrier and Topo Chico and mountain water and all the different kind of sparkling waters, and kind of like a connoisseur of sparkling water now, you know?
Well, I mean, obviously the trend to wellness and a healthier, you know, really goes well with recovery. But I can even remember when our son who was actually at the time still in active addiction
Yes.
and actually still putting a needle in his arm,
Yes.
was getting on to us because we drank soft drinks.
Yes.
So
That's it.
a little bit of
yeah,
going
yeah,
on there,
It's like,
but,
oh yeah,
yeah.
that's right. That's right.
Like-
he was right in an absurd way.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, so we want to eventually talk in depth about momentum recovery, about your role there, and about a lot of the different things that you've encountered and learned through the relationships there. But before we do that, we want to kind of go way back and have you tell us your story. Because, again, almost everybody we interview here did not grow up and think, oh, I'm going to be in the recovery industry one day. There's usually a backstory personal to it that gets them there. So tell us about what your journey was like growing up, and where did substance use become a problem for you?
Yeah. Yeah, so, super grateful to be on here with you guys, first off. Love what the Addiction Prevention Coalition does, and love the resources that you guys provide, and just the role you guys play in helping families, too, and being resources for them. But, yeah, again, my name's Jared Murray. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I've been in recovery for almost 13 years.
Wow.
So got clean and sober in January of 2011. And so a little bit about my story, going back to, growing up, I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama. I grew up in a really good family, two loving parents who poured a lot of unconditional love into me. I had everything you could have ever imagined growing up in terms of support and love and all of those types of things. Very privileged, just, what people would view as a normal family from the outside looking in. I would say that, going back to when I was a child, like after I've done some therapeutic work on myself, I see where there are always these patterns of, feeling less than, just this kind of self-centered fear that we talk about in recovery, right? This fear of not being good enough, fear of being alone, fear of failure, fear of success, just a lot of fears that revolve around me, and...
Could I make a guess that was that difficult to actually express to anyone?
Yeah, 100%. I would say, because I was someone who excelled socially. Like, I always had a ton of friends. I always played sports. I was a really good ball player on the ball field. Like, from the outside looking in, you would think he's the most confident young man.
The internal chaos.
That's right.
There was no idea that you could even express that. Who would I even talk to about
That's right. Yeah, I didn't know how to express that. I don't even know that at the time I was aware that, like, that's how I felt.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I felt different.
Kind of at a subconscious level.
That's right, and it came out in certain ways,
Yeah.
Like I definitely popped in and out of all these different friend groups. Like, I wanted to be the wannabe skateboarder kid, the wannabe gangster kid, the wannabe hippie kid. I could be whoever anybody wanted me to be because I always was looking for acceptance from others in order for me to feel okay. Like I didn't feel okay unless I had that.
Okay.
And but I don't know that I was aware of the level of anxiety that I dealt with as a young person, but it was definitely very present throughout my whole story, And, kind of going into that a little bit more, I recall the first time, my addiction ever was present in my life was way before I ever even used any substances. We talk about how substance use is a symptom of our problem, right? And there's all these other characteristics and patterns we deal with that's really underneath it. And, like, for me, I was in the grocery store with my parents when I was like 6 years old, and we know addiction affects somebody mentally, physically, and spiritually, and the mental and physical component is what takes place in the brain. The spiritual component for me is my disconnect from myself and the world around me, and I was in the grocery store at 6 years old, and I wanted this pack of gum so bad. I was like obsessing about it, and my mom told me I couldn't have it and they weren't going to get it for me, so I just compulsively stole it, so it's kind of the obsession compulsive nature of me right there. And I got in the car with my older brother and his friends who were with us that day and took it out of my pocket in the back of the van and showed it to them because I thought they would think that it was cool
Kinda
that
like
I stole something.
Success,
Hey guys, I stole this. How cool is that? And right then and there, that moment might seem silly or whatever, but it's kind of impactful for me when I think about it because I really wanted their acceptance in order for me to feel okay. So just in that whole scenario, there was the mental, physical, and spiritual component of what I always struggled with.
Almost as if your image or identity was based on just look at what I did.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
maybe
right.
acceptance will come from that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Anything I could do to achieve their acceptance, I would do, and so kind of those patterns that I've always struggled with were present in that one moment, and there's a lot of like links now to trauma and things like that associated with substance use disorder. And I always talked about, well, growing up, I didn't have any substantial trauma that I could think of. That's what I would always say. But now that I've done some therapeutic work, I see where everybody has trauma.
Yeah.
And I definitely have trauma in my life, for sure. Every family system has its own stuff in it, right?
Yeah.
And even though I grew up in what seemed like a very normal family, like our family had its own issues.
Yep.
There were definitely patterns that were passed down to me from my parents. And
It's interesting because a lot of times in those family systems, those patterns actually work, in
Right.
quotes, right, until they don't.
that's right.
Yeah. Right.
That's
Does that
right.
make sense?
That
Yeah.
totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, not to dive too deep, I guess, into some of that, but there's some stuff that, like, was just passed down from, my mom and my dad on ways that they coped with things that kind of taught me on this is how you cope with things. And,
Right.
I think through some of those experiences and just through some of my experiences as an athlete on different teams with different kids and different parents and stuff like that, and certain things that maybe happened in those circles, somewhere along the way, I developed this negative belief system about myself,
Yeah.
right? And I believed it to be true for me. I developed this level of like low self-esteem and insecurity through some of those experiences. And what we talk about in recovery and in treatment so much is like most people that we deal with in treatment and recovery come in with that.
Yeah.
With that negative belief system about themselves. And what
Yeah.
we try to do in recovery is like help them develop a positive belief system about themselves and help them get connected again to themselves, to others,
Yeah.
to the world around them, and
Right.
hopefully to a power greater than them.
Yeah.
And it's often difficult for the very people, family members, concerned significant others, loved ones, however you want to describe it. It's often difficult by the time that person does choose to go to recovery. There's often so much baggage is built up. Even the loved ones can't quite understand this. You got problems because you brought them on yourself.
Yes.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
And it's often that block there that makes it difficult for family members to accept there may be a lot of work that needs to go on here.
That's right.
And we're so mad at this person or so scared or disgusted by what they've done, they either have to disconnect totally or they become a hindrance, maybe even to that person's recovery.
Right, that's right. I mean, I think in every family system that has substance use disorder in it, right, like there's a part that everybody plays.
Yes.
And I know that my part was the biggest in that. I see that
Right.
today. I have acceptance about
By
that.
saying somebody plays a part, you're not blaming them.
That's
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm
Yeah.
not taking any responsibility off of me and,
Yeah.
and what I went through and the pain that I caused my family and things like that. However, I would say that, when it comes to treatment and recovery, for someone to be successful, it really requires the whole family engaging
Yes.
and doing their own work.
That's something that we actually talk about a lot in our family support group, and also education, encouraging families, especially when their loved one goes to treatment, that all of us really need to be in recovery. Because if the family system is not doing their own work while the person that with the substance use disorder is doing theirs, then they come back to the environment and it's unchanged.
That's right.
But I know that's kind of hard to swallow sometimes for parents and other family members, because they're like, okay, we've been through hell here.
Right.
Um,
This is my problem.
exactly.
This is his
Why
or
should
her
we
problem.
Exactly.
change?
Why are we doing the work? But
Yeah.
I know that has been a big part of Art and I's story. The work that that we did. Even prior to our children, getting sober.
Yeah.
But something that so desperately needed to be done, and to give us the courage and the strength
Yeah.
to do the things that we needed to do to be healthier,
That's right.
to provide that healthy environment, even to encourage them to get into treatment. We had to make changes prior to them, being ready.
That's right.
That's
right.
But that's a hard pill to swallow
Hard
sometimes.
pill to swallow.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you think about I think about my own family, right? And there's work that they could, have done in the process of recovery that would have, helped maybe repair some things that they dealt with prior to even my addiction, right? Just some of
Yes.
those patterns that we're talking
Yes.
about. But what's even more significant, of course, is what they lived through
Yes.
in my addiction, right?
Yep.
And the trauma that came from that.
Yep.
And, we talk about addiction being a family disease. Well, I know for my family, my addiction like held their heads underwater for years without them
Yes.
being able to take a breath, and someone described it as that one time, and it
Yes.
really, really hit with me.
Yes.
And I think about my mom and my dad and all the stuff that we went through that we can talk more about in terms of my story. However, I know that for me, like, I was my mom and dad's drug of choice, right? Like, they had to know that I was okay in order for them to be okay. So I
Correct.
know that, my addiction and the disease of addiction affected them in the same ways that it affects the individual who's using, right?
Yes.
Like, again, the same mental obsession,
Yes.
compulsive nature and that
Yes.
spiritual, side of it is going on in them just like it was in me,
Exactly.
even though they're not actively using.
Yes.
And I mean, in our industry, we've even seen like, research done and brain
know, the
scans
brain
done
what
shows
happens
the
in
same
our brain.
chemistry in the family that it does the
Fascinating.
individual who's using.
Texas Tech work,
Yes.
Right.
especially with those brain scans.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Showing
And that's
some
where
of
that
the
came
similar
from.
trauma showing
Yes.
That's
up.
exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
that work. Yeah. Well, take us back into your story. You got us started there with the mental obsession before substance even came into play,
Yes.
right?
That's right.
Where did substance use enter the picture, and then how did it take off?
Yeah, so I started, using when I was about 12, 13 years old. I remember the first time that I ever experimented with alcohol when I was going into my 8th grade year of middle school. That also was the first time I ever experimented with marijuana. I remember, I had went to a music festival with my parents. I grew up in a big music family, and we go to shows today together. It's a big part of my recovery. However, I went to Bonnaroo when I was in like 7th grade, and I remember coming back from that festival, and not even only a couple weeks later, getting together with some of my older brother's friends and experimenting with marijuana for the first time. And, I recall that summer, the first time I used marijuana, like that, the feelings that I described, right? That fear of not being good enough, that fear of being alone, that low self-esteem and insecurity that I dealt with, that loss of identity and all of that I dealt with. The first time I ever used marijuana, it was like all that went away in that moment.
Yeah.
And I felt like I could be who I wanted to be and who others wanted me to be, and
Which is very powerful.
which was
Yes.
very powerful for me at 12, 13 years old, experiencing that,
Yeah,
right?
This just solved life's
Yeah, I was like, well, this is the way that I want to feel for the rest of my life. This is the solution I've been looking for that I haven't been able to find.
And of course, you
anywhere
immediately
else.
went to your parents and said, "Hey, I tried this and it felt like this. We probably ought to talk.
We
about
probably ought to talk about this. Yeah, that's exactly how I handled that, right? Yeah, but believe it or not, too, I think about, that time that I used for the first time. It wasn't like I was with my older brother's friends. They all went to a high school baseball game. I'm in middle school, and I stayed back by myself where we were with them and used by myself for the first time and enjoyed it that much, which was probably, a sign that, this might be an issue. But I really like talking so much more about the internal feelings that I felt, the underlying issues that I dealt with, because so many people think, oh, I just used because I wanted to have a good time or whatever. Like for me, yeah, maybe some of that was a part of it, but I was escaping something from the beginning.
Yes.
I was running from something from the very get-go. And there were patterns and things that I dealt with as a young person, just internal struggles that drove a lot of that, And the minute I started using and found some sort of escape in that way, it was off to the races for me, And what that looked like in my story is, going on into high school, I was continuing to with marijuana and alcohol on a somewhat regular basis at that point. Going into my freshman year of high school, my grades were still decent at that point. I was kind of holding it together. And then I went on into my sophomore year. And at that point, that was when I was introduced to, some harder narcotics, even though I don't like singling out any sort of specific drug or anything like that and making it seem more significant than the other. What makes someone who has substance use disorder is not really what they use necessarily, but the feelings they felt.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes us all kind of have that common bond. However, when I did go into my sophomore year when I was 16, I was introduced to opioids, benzos, cocaine, some different substances at that point. And what's what's crazy, and I love when I talk to teens and adolescents about this, is I wasn't introduced to those things at like a weekend party or anything like that. I was introduced to most of those things at my school, you know, in the bathroom, you know, at my high school. And I just recall the first time I ever used opioids and benzos especially, I had that same experience that I did when I used marijuana for the first time. Like, wow, this helps me be who I want to be. Yeah. I'm more social. I'm more outgoing. The teachers even like me more. People even like me more. That was my perception, you know, that like this makes me feel so good about who I am.
Right.
And without this, I'm not able to feel that way. Yeah. You know, it really brings out the real me was my perception.
And
you know?
Dulls the anxiety.
And it dulls my anxiety.
Yeah.
You know, and it quiets my head. You know, we talk about in recovery how the problem lies between, you know, here. And that was true for me ever since a young person. I always dealt with just a lot of anxiety and, you know, negative self-talk and this negative belief system about myself. And when I first started using it, was like all that went away, you know.
Yeah, I think this is when we get the opportunity to do some prevention, you know, education with parents or going into workplaces and talking, I really find that what you're describing right here, like a lot of parents, grandparents don't realize that, you know, like when I take an opioid, I feel horrible. Like I'll do anything not to take those. But some people have a euphoric experience, you know. So what we always try to encourage parents is, you know, like you may be present when your child has their first opioid. You know, they get their wisdom teeth out or they have a sports injury or whatever. And actually having a conversation with them and saying, how did that make you feel? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because we don't talk about that,
No.
you know, and we don't realize that if they actually have that type of experience, that is profound. Like this is something that they're going to have to be aware of like the rest of their life, you know, as opposed to having a negative reaction. It's like, I'm going to avoid that. Right. But, you know, very tempting for people that have that similar experience.
Yeah, and I mean, I think on that note, like whenever I speak in high schools or I speak to young people, even the young people in the crowd that probably aren't experimenting with substances at the level that I did at that age,
yes,
they still relate and identify with the feelings that I'm describing.
Yes.
That feeling of, do I fit in? Am I good enough? Am I going to amount to anything? This fear of what am I going to do with my life? Who am I? They're questioning all those things. They're dealing with a lot of those types of insecurities.
Yes.
Right? And they all can relate with that.
Yes.
And it's so important to educate them on like, hey, this was how I responded to that, you know,
Yes.
as I did try certain things and have that profound experience that helped me escape some of those issues. And this
Right.
is what it led to for me,
Right.
you know,
Right.
Because they all can relate with those type of feelings.
Yes. And I think, you know, even now with the mental health challenges that we're seeing in our, you know, teens, I think they carry a level of stress and anxiety, even performance anxiety,
Right.
you know, that is constant with them. And now with the prevalence of access to so much more medication through social media,
Yep.
through in the schools, I mean, it's a deadly cocktail that
It just
that
is.
is that is setting up. So
I can't imagine going through the self-identity and insecurity type crisis I went through at a young age. You know, like if I had the access of social media at that point to just be
Yes.
able to chase likes and, you know, try to get the validation I always drastically needed because I dealt with that performance anxiety. I wanted to excel at everything that I did. And if I didn't feel like I did, I felt like I was nothing.
Yeah.
You know, that was
Yeah.
just kind of what I dealt with. And,
layer social media on top
right,
of that.
you layer social media on top of that and just the different
Well,
stuff
it's
in our
interesting
society
to
today.
hear you say that because, you know, it would almost be an assumption somebody meeting you in your age that you would say, oh, well, it was like that for you, but it's accelerated
Yeah.
just in the last decade.
Yeah.
That's right.
Really accelerated.
It has.
Yep.
Yeah.
I even think about funny kind of thing, right? When I'm talking to young people about going to treatment today and we tell them they can't have a cell phone for the first 90 days, you know, in my mind, I'm like, come on, man, it's a cell phone. You
Yeah.
know, like, are you going to let that get in the way of your sobriety? But I have to really step back and think about, okay, think about if you were going to treatment today. You know,
Yes.
you didn't even have an iPhone 13 years ago when you went to treatment. Like, that is a really difficult thing to give up for young people. That
It
is
is.
so much of their identity,
It
right?
is.
I mean, more reason on why they don't need it initially in treatment.
Right.
However, like, that's a really difficult thing to let go of.
Yep.
You know, it keeps them connected to everything.
They're having withdrawal from
Exactly.
drugs and a phone.
And a phone. It's different. Makes things really complex.
So tell us how did things progress, go downward for you as you went through high school?
Did your parents know at this point, sophomore? I mean,
I would say that they didn't know then, probably at my sophomore year, you know, that I was battling what I was battling.
Yeah.
Later years in high school, yes, that's what started to kind of come out, you know, and that kind of ties to what Art, you're asking me too, because going on from my sophomore year when I started experimenting with harder substances, I remember at that point in my addiction, I was just like, wow, the way these things make me feel, I'll take whatever I can take and get it from whoever I can get it from, just to continue to have this feeling, right?
So are you now layering?
Yeah, I mean, I was just using all these different kind of substances at this point in my life, because I guess I hadn't really found the one that was my quote-unquote drug of choice at that point. But at this point, I was just using anything I could get my hands on to just change the way that I felt, you know, because it seemed to be the one thing I'd found that gave me a sense of relief. And thinking of talking about identity, right? Like, I also found, like, wow, this is my identity now, you know? Like, I'm selling drugs. I'm this guy that can get everybody stuff.
Again,
and people are coming to me, and it equates with success. It equates with friendship in my mind, and people accept me and validate me. And, you know, I took on this identity of, oh, Jared Murray is the guy who's the dope head, you know, like, and I thought it was cool. That was my persona of it, right? And I really wrapped my identity up in that, of being that guy. Thought it was cool. I thought it was funny. There was this sense of ego that came with it. And we talk about ego in recovery a lot, right? And it's that pendulum swing of trying to feel superior, and there's the inferior aspect of it. And I always felt inferior to everybody, and because of that, I swung to the opposite side of trying to feel better than everybody, you know. And I just constantly lived on that emotional imbalance growing up as a young person, and my addiction was so wrapped up in all that, you know, the validation I was getting from people. And
where do you think, and this is always hard for people, but was there a point where you could look back now and go, there was a shift in terms of physical dependency or psychological dependency? Not just, I know the benefits of it and I've got the image, I'm successful, this is my identity. But somewhere along the line, there's usually a shift where both the physical and psychological and spiritual dependency is so deep now it wouldn't matter if I wanted to get out anyway.
That's right. I'd say 17 and 18 years old is when that happened for me, my junior year and senior year. Wow. You know, going through my junior year of high school was when things really started to escalate. I got arrested with a DUI going into my junior year, and I was 16 at the time, not even 17 yet, and cops called my parents to come and get me. You know, they let me go, didn't charge me with the DUI, got in trouble at home and whatnot. At that point, now it's in front of my parents' face, because they found marijuana in my car, a pipe in my car, and I'd been heavily under the influence of alcohol. So I started getting drug tested at this point in time, you know, and I'm cheating on all these drug tests consistently and getting away with it.
Wow.
And but
How'd
now
you know how to do that?
I don't know where I learned that. I think those that go through addiction definitely are very resourceful.
Yes.
And so, man, the lengths I would go to try to manipulate my family, and the skill set I had with it was pretty astounding, you know.
Yeah, my sponsor used to always say to me, if you would just use 1/10 of your resourcefulness at being sober as you did to use to hide it.
That's right.
Just think what you could conquer the world.
That's exactly right, man. And so I going back to some of that, just thinking about after that first DUI. So 6 months after that, I was driving down the backside of Monte Sano in Huntsville, and it was raining. It was late at night. I was trying to make curfew. I was heavily under the influence of a few different narcotics and alcohol. I just turned 17. I hydroplaned off the road, hit this parked car that kept me from going off of the side of the mountain, that shot me to the other side of the road. And the cop showed up, of course, and I got hit with a DUI, charged with a DUI that night. There wasn't really any getting out of that one. I had totaled my car. It was pretty substantial. And I remember when the police showed up that night, you know, they said, we have very rarely seen a parked car sitting on that side of the road that kept you from going off of the side of the mountain, you know. And back then when I was a young person, I always chalked up those things as like, oh, well, I'm just invincible. This will never take my life, you know?
Bulletproof.
And yeah, I'm just bulletproof. And now I look back on that, you know, situation, and I see where some power greater than me was present in my life. I was very disconnected from it, but it was there, you know? And, you know, thank goodness I've tapped into that today and realized the purpose that power has for me, you know, in my life, and made it through what I made it through. But I look at situations like that where near-death experiences happened and I survived them, and I try to really have gratitude about that today, you know. And I got charged with that DUI at 17 and continued to use, right? Like, and that's this physical dependency and spiritual dependency that we're talking about now.
Despite all the circumstances.
Despite,
piling up.
that's what we talk about when it comes to real addiction, right? Is despite negative consequences, we keep using.
Yep.
And that's what I was starting to see when I was 17, 18 years old.
It's almost no longer a choice at that point.
That's exactly
people
right.
Don't like to. It's hard for people to face that sometimes,
Right.
but it's becoming almost not a choice.
That's exactly right. And that's what it was like for me even at that age. You know, my grades are declining. I got arrested with that DUI. I'm put on probation at that point. I'm cheating on my drug screen still. I get caught cheating on a few of them. My parents are trying to figure out what to do because they know there's a problem there, but I'm filling them with manipulation. They're buying into it. We're all living in this space of justification and denial and delusion. And, you know, and the crazy thing is a lot of what I projected to them, I believed. You know, that was the insanity that I lived in. Like, I sometimes, you know, believe that my problem wasn't that substantial, despite the fact that it's staring me in the face.
We begin to believe our own lies.
That's right. And they would quickly buy into that too. So now we're all just in this, you know, spot of, you know, living in the crisis of the disease of addiction. That's what we're all living in as a family unit, right? And this is how the whole family goes through it together. Is like they're dealing with the same justifications and denial level that I am, you know? And I mean, I put my parents through so much my junior year and my senior year. Like, there was constant stuff always going on. I got arrested and pulled over for DUI 3 more times. They let me go every single time and called my parents. The last one that happened when I was a senior, my mom said, you know what, we're going to let you decide, to the police officer, you know, like you decide if you want to take him in or send him home with us, you know, because we're lost at what to do at this point. And, you know, I mean, I stole from my family. I lied to my family. I was stealing my grandmother's prescription medications, and they caught on to that, you know, and hit me with that one night. And the whole time, as I'm always going through all this stuff with them, like, I know I'm a good person at this point in my life. I know I have a big heart. You know, I would look my mom and dad in the eyes and wonder, like, why can't I connect to what y'all are going through? You know, why can't I feel it?
Wow.
You know? And having, like, some level of awareness, you know, about that. And, man, not even being able to tap into it. Like, all my mind was fixated on is I can't feel these feelings.
Right.
I have to go and use to escape this.
That is a very, and I can see the emotion hitting you now as you're reliving some of that. And it's part of your recovery. It's part of your wholeness and healing to go through that.
Yep.
But it's an important point for family members to hear, because at that stage, from their side of it, all they see is this unfeeling person that keeps hurting us.
Right.
Yeah.
And it takes a while, I think, for parents and loved ones to understand that's not who that person really is.
That's right.
That's the addiction
That's right.
that has taken over.
That's right.
Yeah.
Man, and on that note, like, what I like to call it is, you know, the family develops this sense of compassion fatigue, right?
Yep.
Like, we quit viewing them as a cancer patient, right?
Yes.
Because we know that with the disease of addiction, that it is a chronic progressive illness, just like cancer, just like diabetes, just like heart disease. Like, it's a chronic progressive disease. But the person with cancer doesn't lie to you, doesn't steal from you, doesn't cause all this external wreckage and unmanageability in your family.
Right.
And because the person with addiction does, we quickly lose sight of what they're suffering from.
Yeah, it's easy for, over time, and fatigue, as you said, for family members to think of their addicted loved one as just a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be loved. And how do you parse that out?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's tough, you know, and we deal with it every day. And working with families on the intervention side, the admission side of things, you know, is trying to get that family back on this side of compassion and empathy again, you know, and it's so difficult to get them there because you're trying to also, you know, validate, hey, we understand why you feel the way you do about your loved one, but how we can't get their loved one help until we get the family back to that place of compassion.
How do you set healthy limits within the family system but stay emotionally connected in a healthy way?
That's right.
Most of us don't grow up with that ability.
That's right.
I don't think.
Well, and I mean, you know, I think that families, we don't realize, but we're so afraid. Like, I mean, there's such a fear of losing our child that we continue to do the things because we're afraid we're going to lose the connection. You know, if I set those boundaries and say, okay, you know, you're on your own,
right,
then I lose the connection, and then I'm going to lose you. So it's like we still try all of these different things to get back in control, to save you, you know, to convince you to get help and to get sober, because the fear is so great.
That's what,
you know what I'm saying? And we know we haven't done it right.
That's right.
And so we've got guilt, you know, and we're trying to deal with that without talking about it because we don't want to bring all that out.
Right.
But until we deal with our own stuff, you know, we stay enmeshed and we keep it going just enough to try to keep control, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Carrie, it's just hearing you say all that, I think about, as you were talking about it, all I'm thinking about is how substantial fear plays a role in all of this in the family system as we're living in this, right? Like, fear is dominating everything. It's controlling everything, you know, shame and fear.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, you got the big three.
That's right.
In some combination, fear, shame, and anger.
That's right.
Yeah.
All three are swirling
right
all the time and keeping the chaos going.
That's right.
And staying in isolation because we're trying to not, you know, it's your problem.
Yep.
And I don't want to bring it out to the public because, you know, we're trying to protect you.
That's right.
Because we're thinking about your future.
That's right.
So we keep.
In our reputation.
In our reputation.
That's right.
So we keep it in the dark.
That's right.
So we're not going out and getting the help that we need.
That's right.
And it's a mess.
It's a mess. And you feel like you're alone in it. As
yes.
the individual
Nobody
who's suffering from it and the family who's going through it.
Nobody else
is
knows.
going through this.
It's
Nobody
just
else
us.
has experienced these feelings or these thoughts, you know. It's just us. And I felt like that as the person who was using for so long, right?
Yes.
I felt like I was misunderstood.
Yeah.
Nobody understood the way that I felt. Nobody thought the way that I thought.
Yeah.
And I didn't come to find out that was not the case until I got help and went to treatment, you know, that there was a whole lot of people out there who had my story.
What eventually got you to treatment? Pick the storyline back up because you're end of high school. It's not going well.
Right.
Well, take us from there. Yeah,
I mean, and I think, you know, through the multiple arrests in high school, the one-way down elevator that we were living in as a family, you know, it just was crisis after crisis, event after event, and my parents did, you know, allow me to go to the University of Alabama, which you think about that decision then, right? You know, and I talk to them sometimes about that, and they're just like, we had to first off get you out of the house because it was affecting our marriage and our lives bad.
It sounds so familiar.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And also we had this justification and maybe sense of denial that we just felt like, okay, if he can go to college and he's going to just figure these things out and he's going to figure out a way to make it.
Yeah.
And this is just what we have to do for him at this point and give him that opportunity.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I went down to the University of Alabama with a pretty substantial substance use issue and pledged to fraternity. And nothing against fraternities at the University of Alabama. I think they're great experiences, and I still had some great experiences with that too. However, you know, for the substance use problem I had at the time, might have not been the best idea for me. And so I went down there, and, you know, my freshman year, first semester, I mean, I just also did not know how to live, you know, like I had been living in my addiction for so long. I didn't know how to take care of myself. I didn't know how to do my own
kind
schedule.
Of that concept of delayed emotional growth.
Right. Just
delayed socialization.
That's right. Executive functioning issues.
Yes.
Like I just struggled with those things. And
most people are struggling with that at 18 or 19 anyway.
Anyway.
And you come
Yes.
through all this substance use
Yes.
with it, right? I just did not have it figured out at all. And so I got a 0.5 GPA my first semester. I didn't go to class. I didn't study. I didn't do any of that. My whole life at this point in time was literally, and had been for a while, was revolving around using,
Yeah.
and it was to that point, Art, like you mentioned, where I didn't have a choice to
Yeah.
use or not use.
Yeah.
And, I think about it in recovery today, how powerful it is to be able to wake up and have a choice,
Yeah.
Yes.
because I remember what it was like every morning waking up and not having one.
Yeah, being
Oh,
powerless.
gosh.
And being
over-
powerless in that way, right? And like I think about how scary that is to
Oh,
know
gosh,
that
yeah.
like, hey, if I don't keep doing the things I'm doing,
Right.
even at 13 years sober, I can get back to a place to where I am powerless and don't have a choice to use or not use, because
Yeah.
that was where I was.
Yeah.
So most
You know?
most of your waking and probably even sleeping hours really then becomes, how do I get what I need?
Yeah.
That's it. It was just survival at
Yeah.
that point. My opiate addiction was so substantial at that point to where I was just surviving every day and trying not to be sick. I know there's a piece of recovery literature that talks about how behaviors become reduced to the like animalistic type behavior, and that's
Yeah.
what it was for me. It was
Yeah.
the obsession and compulsion to use. It was fight or flight
Yeah.
all day, every single day.
Yeah.
And it was miserable.
Yes.
I recall being at these big fraternity and sorority parties, surrounded by people, feeling 100% alone, and the level of like isolation, even around people, and anxiety that I dealt with if I hadn't used or if I hadn't gotten my fix was just debilitating, and I think about those feelings that I was dealing with at that time. And I think what causes that level of isolation and those feelings for me, right, was this substantial amount of shame
Yeah.
I was living in, and at this point it's getting to where substance has already been quieting that shame, and a lot of
Which
traumatic.
means you're probably increasing
Right.
dosage,
That's
and
right.
frequency,
That's
and
exactly
duration.
right. All that's taking place at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
And so I get through my freshman year somehow barely. Grades were not good at all. I got put on academic probation and all that. My parents were contemplating pulling me out. They came down the spring semester and found out I had addiction to Oxycontin at the time, and I had to get them to pay back a bunch of drug dealers. I'm taking my parents' checks that they're writing into drug dealers' houses as they're driving me around to them is just one of the most embarrassing things ever. But that's what they would do, right? They'd come in and try to save me, and then I would justify to them why I was going to get it figured out, and they would believe it and buy into it. So we were just still living in this vicious cycle. And so they decided to keep me down at Alabama for the summer semester and hoping that things would kind of turn around. And, at this point I have awareness that I have a problem, but I'm still using despite of it, and my parents have awareness about it too. And, my summer year going into my sophomore year, I had a really traumatic event happen with, a drug dealer that, I stole from, and it was a big situation and super traumatic. And I remember waking up the next morning completely defeated and broken and calling my parents and telling them again, hey, I haven't figured this out. I need help. And even after that, what's fascinating about this story is they called up to the Student Health Center, and the Student Health Center in Alabama didn't really have any resources at that
Back
point in
then.
time. It was like there was a nurse there who said, hey, my son went to the Suboxone clinic, and, here's a resource there. And my parents sent me there, which for me, like for a lot of people, that's effective and that works. For me, I didn't use it like I was supposed to. I didn't take it like I was supposed to. I traded it for other drugs and sold it or whatever. But I think about, back then, if the university had the resources in place at that point in time, would my outcome would have been different, because I continued to use for 6 more months after this event. And I did go on to help start the Collegiate Recovery Community at Alabama in 2012, which
Right.
we can talk about that in a minute. However, after that event, stayed back out for about 6 more months. My sophomore year at Alabama was when things got worse than they've ever been. I started using IV drugs, and I was injecting, Oxycontin, heroin on a limited basis, but mainly Oxycontin and cocaine.
Right. Similar path to our oldest son.
Right.
I think, when you're in that culture, somebody finally just says, why are you chasing those pills and that time and that money? Let me show you something.
Right. That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. And so at this point in time, I'm starting to use IV drugs, and I'm realizing again that, hey, this is not good. This is out of control. I mean, I'm waking up every morning sick and just, surviving every day and just trying to not be sick every single day. literally, physically, mentally, spiritually, all of the above. And, I recall, like, even in my addiction then, I would throw, syringes out of my window in the car and be like, I'm done, and I'd go back and find them the next day and use them. That was the level of insanity I'm living in at this point in my life. And so my parents realized I was spending a lot of money. I had an Oxycontin and a cocaine addiction, which was a very expensive addiction. And so they just kind of drew a little bit of boundaries with me, and we can talk about boundaries, as well. I do believe that because they did start to implement some boundaries, that's the only reason I ended up getting help, right? And those boundaries that they put in place did lead me into some legal issues, right? But that was the intervention that it took to get me to treatment. And so they cut me off financially. I began to support. They were still paying for me to be in college, right? Like they just cut off a little bit, just we're not going to give them as much money. And that was all it took for me to spiral out and finally get arrested again. But anyways, I started supporting and still my habit, and I'm doing things that go against my true nature, and I'm stealing and just trying to survive every single day. And eventually all that caught up with me, and I got arrested on January 27th, 2011, on the campus of the University of Alabama at 10 a.m. in the middle of the day. I was getting ready to go meet my drug dealer, and I literally walk outside, and all these investigators pull up in white trucks around my car and surround me, and I got hit with 5 felonies and 2 counts of 2 misdemeanors that day. And I recall going into the police station at the University of Alabama, and they brought in this big stack of charges they had on me. And Art and Carrie, it was like the first time I ever had any acceptance about what was going on in my life. I recall telling them, like, yes, I stole that. Yes, I did that. Yes, I did that. And there was like this sense of relief I had, because before that, everything was always someone else's problem, and it was always someone else's fault. And I never was able to see my part in any of it, but I was so broken at this point, and just had this different level of acceptance about all of it because I was so broken. I recall telling him, like, yeah, I want help. I'll do anything I can to get help. And so I went to jail, got arrested, went to jail that night, spent the night in jail. Of course, my parents came and bailed me out the next day. And I used the entire next day, right? Because I still haven't been to treatment yet. I'm still suffering from this inability to have a choice to use or not use, even after I had that experience the day before, which is another, I guess, note on just how powerful addiction is, right? And so the next day, used the entire next day with my parents, driving me around to different drug dealers, me telling them I'm paying them back when I'm really going in and using. And I remember my mom that day coming out of one of the drug dealers' apartments looking at me and saying, I know what you just did. And, my dad looking at me in my eyes and telling me he can't even see who I am anymore, And, I woke up the next morning, and that's when they said, hey, we got you a bed somewhere, and we're going to treatment. And I went, and that was January 29th, 2011. And since that day, I haven't drank or used, and coming up on 13 years being clean and sober. And my life's been, forever changed as a result of, getting the help that I needed. And it was such a powerful experience for me going to treatment. I remember sitting outside on the bench, that they had at the treatment center I went to, and just being so scared. I don't know how to live a life without, these things I've depended on to be okay for so long. I don't know who I am. I don't know what this is going to look like. But, man, I still went in there, and, I remember sitting in my first treatment group. And like I said, I always felt so alone, right? And I sat in that group, and I heard this person tell my story, and this person tell my story, and this person tell my story. And it wasn't even just the drugs that they used, but it was the feelings that they felt.
The details are different.
That's it, man. It was the feelings that they felt. That's it. And the process of identification that I experienced in that moment was relieving for me. I wasn't running from it anymore.
Right. The power of community to
That's
begin and sustain a healing process is huge.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. What they say, the opposite of addiction is connection. And I know we hear that all the time, but man, it is so true, right?
Yep.
Like I was disconnected from myself and others and a power greater than me. And I needed to be connected in those 3 areas. Yeah. And that's where we find fulfillment.
So without getting, specific about where you were and that type of thing, can you look back and say now what worked in that system, what helped? What may be common to any good recovery system, maybe?
Yeah, I would say that for me, like in that system, the education that I got first off on what I was really dealing with and suffering from was crucial. The therapeutic services, the individual therapy, the group therapy, the clinical aspect was crucial, right? I needed the spiritual aspect, but I heavily also needed the clinical aspect, to really treat what I had going on. But most importantly, out of all those things, right, it was the community that I experienced. That's what I desperately needed. We all desire relationships. We all desire connection. So much of my addiction was because I desired that and didn't feel like I had it. When I got into recovery and when I was in treatment, I finally found that, right?
Yes.
And felt it, in a different level than I ever had before. There was these people who I just related with on such a deeper level. And that sense of community that came from that was very empowering, right? And really fulfilling for me. So I would say the combination of those things, right? The clinical aspect, the spiritual aspect that I was educated on, and really the community I experienced in treatment helped me, be successful. And then the education on, hey, here are the things you need to do after treatment, right? That's the biggest piece is like to sustain your recovery. Here's some daily things you need to do on a regular basis. And those are still things that I, to the best of my ability, tried to do today at 13 years clean and sober,
Did you go from your intensive recovery or rehabilitation? Did you do any sober living after that?
So,
or did you?
What's interesting about that, Art, is back when I went to treatment 13 years ago, as a 20-year-old in treatment, I was the only 20-year-old in there.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by all these older people, and there wasn't as much. Our industry has shifted so much today.
Yes.
To sober
Aftercare.
living, extended care, aftercare. Back then, the culture was you do inpatient and outpatient.
Right.
And so many people weren't successful at just doing inpatient and outpatient
Right.
treatment. Now, for whatever reason, I was, but I think a lot of that was because I found a young adult community at the University of Alabama when I went back there and helped start the Collegiate recovery community. And that was really where I found those relationships in that community of people my age who looked like I did, talked like I did, and you know what I mean? Just kind of found
really
that identity and community. It is.
Because
there's
not a lot of people that age group
That's right.
that have been successful yet in obtaining enough sobriety to actually make a healthy community.
That's exactly right. And so now I work, in my time working in the treatment field, which has been about, I guess, 8.5 years or so, I've always worked for long-term young adult specific programs, right? And educating families on the importance of going beyond just the traditional 30 days of treatment and how important long-term treatment is. And also if you're dealing with a young person, needing treatment, how important it is for them to be around people their age, because not all the young people that we deal with, at least most of them, aren't really jumping at joy for recovery, right? They don't they don't come in bursting with motivation sometimes, right? They come in because they were intervened on, because parents put down some boundaries and there was some leverage. And they need to come in and be able to relate and identify, and if they're with the 50-year-olds in the room who are married, who have kids or whatever, they think, well, that's not me. That's not my story. I'm not like them, And so they're always going to look for differences anyways. So we try to create an environment where there's some similarities. So I'm a big believer in long-term treatment, and some specific programming too around what they may need. And I think I found a lot of that for me in the community at the Collegiate Recovery community, which kind of goes back into my story a little bit. After completing treatment, my wife, now girlfriend at the time, was still in school at the University of Alabama. So I would go down there and see her some when I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't supposed to step back foot in Tuscaloosa for a little while, but I, did, to see her. And I met this man named Johnny Maxwell, who had a vision to replicate the Texas Tech Collegiate Recovery model at the University of Alabama. And I met him through AA, and he told me that, hey, we're gonna help you get back into school here, and
Which you thought was impossible.
I thought was impossible,
because
right?
of the felonies
That's right, because of my charges and what they told me when I was getting arrested. The president of the university was in that police station, and he looked at my rap sheet and said, "You're not coming back to school here," you know, and Johnny Maxwell, who was the director of the Student Health Center at the time, who had a lot of recovery resources and a big believer in recovery and a big heart for recovery, advocated for me to get me back into school. And he put me in front of the dean of students, Dr. Tim Hebson, and I went in and met with him one day, and he said, before you came to meet with me in here, I had my mind made up. You weren't coming back to school here, but after meeting with you today and hearing your story, I'm going to go to war to get you back into school here. And you know, they did. And they got me back enrolled. They got me back accepted into the University of Alabama, contingent upon being the poster child of the collegiate recovery community. We're going to see what it's like letting young people like you back on campus. So no pressure at all, right? Better not mess this up.
Boy.
That's right. But man, like, I had an incredible experience. I went back to the university that I dreamed of graduating from, that I thought I would never be able to graduate from. I got to experience recovery on that campus. You know, the place where a lot of bad things happened to me, I got to go and have a different experience at. I remember, like, cutting corners on my way to class when I first went back there, just kind of still fearful about, you know, are there people here looking for? I just lived in that place of fear for so long. And then as I progressed in my recovery, you perceive the world as a place you can survive in and be okay in and
So
feel
was a big
comfortable
part
in.
of that having found a non-clinical support group
That's
like
right.
AA or 12 steps?
100%, right? And that's what I found in the collegiate recovery community, right there. And so, I mean, I'm going to classes, I'm making the dean's list every single semester, and I'm just experiencing so much fulfillment in myself as a result of being successful in that way and never thinking that I would be able to. You know, I couldn't get a 0.5 GPA when I was using. Now I'm getting 4.0s and, you know, just excelling in a lot of areas of my life. And so it was such an amazing experience, right? And I got to graduate in 2014 and walk across that stage. And, man, that graduation ceremony, I remember crying like a baby in there, like, because I never dreamed that that would be a possibility, you know, for me. And so, you know, the collegiate recovery community and the role it played in my recovery was substantial, for sure.
Oh, wow. Killing me.
Right.
So we're running out of time. So I want you to talk about momentum and educate us on that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to run out of time and not say a couple things to you.
Yeah.
One is you have been such an incredible support for me personally, looking for resources, but your knowledge of programs out there and you know what they specialize in is I don't even know how you know all that. I mean, I know you're in this space, but as I listen to your story, you know, I can see that it's born out of a passion to help people find their community, you know, when they're struggling.
Right.
So I just want to say to you, you know, you have helped me help other people find places for years now. And that's really difficult to do when there are, you know, they don't have insurance and they're this age and they're struggling particularly with this and they have family support or they don't have family support. You know, we've had such unique, you know, criteria, and it's like you sit on your phone, like as soon as I send it, it comes back. So I just want you to hear that you have helped so many. I mean, I don't even know what you do day in and day out. Find places where they can find hope and healing. So thank you for the investment of helping people, because I know they're hard days and you have a family and you have other responsibilities. And so, I mean, it's just noted that I know if I need something, you're there.
Absolutely.
The second thing is, you know, I was just this weekend at the Hope and Healing Grief Retreat.
Right.
And that's a retreat that we offer once a year for families that have lost somebody to substance use disorder. So I'm probably emotional just because of
Coming off of that.
Right. But
Plus, that's back in Jared's hometown.
Exactly.
Right.
It's in Huntsville.
Right.
And your mom is on the board of Not One More Alabama.
That's right.
And you are personally responsible for connecting me to Patty at Not One More and Virginia at Drug Education Council.
Trifecta.
The trifecta.
we got Huntsville, we got Birmingham, we got Mobile.
Yep.
So we're
And we got
That's
connected through Jared,
Yep.
actually during the pandemic.
Yeah, during the pandemic. That's right.
And came together and did some education and have not stopped. I mean, like, we love each other and love working together, and that would not have happened without you. So
Carrie, Virginia, and Patty together. That is the trifecta for sure. That is a scary thing. Like you women are on a mission, you know.
Well, it does. It's an example of where collaboration.
That's right.
Is helpful, and
That's right.
We need that. We need it everywhere, but with this epidemic of substance use and all the different tentacles that's going on, collaboration is the only way we're going to make a dent in this.
yeah.
That's right.
And everybody not protecting their space. And
That's
type
right.
of thing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Art, you know.
So tell us a little bit about momentum.
Yeah, kind of on, the topic of momentum. And before I jump into that, there was only one thing I definitely wanted to make sure I touched on. It's just talking about the family piece again in terms of my recovery real quick. Like, relationships were restored in my family system with my dad, my mom, my brother. And it was amazing being able to watch that happen throughout my recovery. And so I would have never dreamed that I'd have the relationship with my family that I have today, as a result of my recovery. So it's just kind of giving that message of knowing that there is hope and don't give up.
Yeah.
And if your loved one is struggling, know that like recovery can happen for them and those relationships can be restored.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Just wanted to note that. Now going into momentum, a little bit about the program I work for. So our owner, Rick Barney, I met him a few years back when he was a primary therapist at another program that I would go and visit when I was doing outreach for a different program. And he reached out to me a few years ago and had an opportunity open up at his program that made a lot of sense for me at the time. And, Rick is a really good, really, really well-established clinician and really great clinical mindset who opened up Momentum in 2016, specifically originally as an 8-bed extended care for young adult men. And throughout the course of the past few years, it has now grown into a full continuum of care for young adult men, and we've now replicated the men's program for young adult women as well, that his wife, Gabby Barney, who's a psychiatric PA, kind of spearheaded. So really kind of just hitting the highlights of both of those programs. We offer a primary residential level of care. They step down from there into extended care. They step down from there into sober living, and they can be with us anywhere from about 9 to 12 months if they complete our full continuum. And what I love about Momentum and what I love about our program is the sense of community that's there that we talk about. As a young person being in recovery, knowing what young people need coming into treatment, what they need more than anything else is healthy relationships and to be able to establish community and also see that they can have fun in recovery. Sometimes when I'm telling parents about what we do at Momentum and I'm talking about, hey, we do a lot of adventure-based therapy, like we take them surfing, we take them free diving, we go fly fishing, we go paddleboard, and they're like, sounds like a vacation. I'm like, well, they do hard work, too. However, to get a young person to engage in this process, you have to show them that they can be a normal 20-year-old in recovery and that recovery can be fun, and we try to do anything we can to allow them to experience that therapeutically. But we are a dual diagnosis based program, so we very much come from the approach of addressing issues that come from the mental health side of things alongside the substance abuse piece too. And our industry has moved and shifted so much into having more attention around mental health, right? And so I think that's important to note is that we're, a program that treats both primary mental health and primary substance abuse issues for young adult males and females, primarily 18 to 35-year-olds.
Okay. So important.
That's right.
Because the resources are just not there.
What's your primary role with Momentum?
Yeah, so I do, right now I actually am overseeing most all of our admissions, which since I've been doing this work in the field, I've done business development, outreach, and admissions. And so I still do some business development and outreach too, just from doing that for a long time, but primarily I'm handling our admissions. And so what that looks like for me is dealing with phone calls on the front end with families, telling them about the program, but most importantly, hearing about what's going on in their situation and trying to coach them through their crisis. And if they're appropriate and a good fit in our program, kind of walking them through all the way until they come into our door. And if they're not and they need other resources, doing everything I can to help them find other resources too, is a lot of what my role looks like.
So Momentum is physically located in North Carolina.
Yep, Wilmington,
right?
North Carolina.
Wilmington, right.
Yep.
But I know people come there from a lot of different geographic regions. Is
That's
that
right. That's correct. All over the country. I mean, we have people kind of come from all over. We have a very substantial national kind of presence.
So if someone, a family member or the struggling person was interested, how would they find out about Momentum?
Yeah, I mean, they could call me directly. They could reach out to me directly, and I can give you guys my contact information.
Okay.
To be able
We
to
could
do
even
that.
say it right now if you're okay.
Yeah. I mean, my direct cell phone number is 205-600-4312. And then my email is Jared, which is JARED @momentumrecovery.com. And so they can reach out to me through my cell or my email if they want more information about Momentum, or if they just want to talk about recovery and just need treatment resources.
yes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because obviously Momentum can't handle everybody, even if they qualify.
That's right. That's exactly
and often folks don't have what they need to do something like Momentum.
Exactly.
You're, as Carrie said, a great resource for people to kind of move them in this direction, or do you know about this, or are you aware about that?
Yeah, I'd say I probably get people connected to other resources and even sometimes other programs more than I do anything else, you know?
Yeah.
You're really good at it.
Yeah, which I do love doing that.
Yeah.
It's good to find my identity in those things today, right?
Yeah, but I think it's all, I do think, when you listen to your story,
Right.
you can see why you're really passionate about that.
That's right.
Because that's something that you longed for.
Totally. That's exactly right. That I've loved. It's helping people.
It's beautiful.
You know? I just didn't help them very positively in the back in the day, but now I get to, right?
Well, that's often the case, is that something that we were wired for gets misused.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And then when we can get clean and sober for a time, often that same gifting begins to actually flourish.
That's right.
Yeah, well, we use it for good or for evil.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay, so we're out of time.
Yeah.
So we always like to end with inviting you to speak directly to somebody that might be struggling or might feel hopeless.
Whether it's the struggling person or
the family member.
Yeah.
So what would you say to them today?
Yeah, I would say that, for anybody who's struggling, whether it's a struggling individual, or the family, just to know that, there is hope. Recovery can and does happen. I've experienced it in my own life. I know that when people are going through their crisis, whether it be the family or the individual who's struggling, they feel alone. They feel like there is no hope, like we've talked about. And the biggest thing I would want them to know is that recovery can 100% be a reality for them. Whether they've never been to treatment before, whether it's their 4th or 5th time in treatment, it's to know that, to never give up on that hope, right? And, and that they can have a better experience in recovery than what they've been experiencing and what they're going through now is what I would definitely want them to know, right?
Thank you so much, Jared. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for what you do day in and day out. It's a privilege to know you.
Well, thank you for what you guys do and for having me on here and the resource that you guys are for families in need. And, I'm just super grateful to be on here with you guys. This has been awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. Folks, thanks for joining us on this episode of APC Recovery Cafe. And as Jared said, if you're in that position, whether you're the struggling person or the loved one of the struggling person, reach out, connect, whether it's APC or any other organization. Start by connecting. You never know what will happen from there. We'll see you next time.
One of the things that APC is known for is being a connector, because we're stronger together.
Not only are we there for those who are suffering through substance use disorder, but we're there for family members, and we really take our job seriously.
We all have personal reason why we're in this field. We're changing people's lives one community at a time.